Cutting equity had seemed harmless. Just a small adjustment. But it removed ownership thinking from the company. And once that mindset was gone, no amount of effort could replace it. The downfall wasn't loud. It was quiet, careful, and slow. Just like the decision that started it. Months later, the company's name disappeared. No updates. No posts. No job listings. Just a short mention online about a startup that didn't make it. No details. No lessons. Just an ending. I kept my notes but never shared them. I didn't need to. The outcome told the story better than I ever could. Every ignored warning showed up in the final result. I don't feel angry when I think about it. I feel clear. I didn't damage the company. I didn't take revenge. I simply stopped acting like an owner after ownership was taken away. The equity cut changed more than my compensation. It changed my behavior. And behavior shapes systems. Ownership creates care. Care creates protection. Protection prevents failure. When equity was reduced quietly, that chain broke quietly too. The startup didn't fail because I left. It failed because leadership believed ownership was just a number on paper. They didn't see it was the reason people stayed late, fixed problems early, and protected the future. When they cut equity, they cut commitment. Everything that followed was just consequence. That single decision didn't hurt right away, but it decided the ending long before anyone noticed. I was invited to a final call. Not to fix anything, but to explain one last time what went wrong. I spoke plainly. I said cutting equity didn't just change numbers. It changed how people thought, how they cared, how they protected the future. No one interrupted me. When the call ended, there was nothing left to discuss. The outcome was already decided. That night, I thought about the early days. The long hours. The belief. The trust. None of it had been fake. It had just been treated as expendable. The company hadn't failed because of one bad product or one lost customer. It failed because ownership was removed quietly, and with it, the reason people went beyond what was required. When the last early contributor left, the company lost its memory. From there, collapse wasn't dramatic. It was inevitable. The shutdown didn't come with a big announcement. It happened slowly. One service was turned off. Then another. Office days were reduced. Tools were canceled. The company was shrinking without saying the word out loud. Customers noticed. Support replies became shorter. Problems stayed open longer. Features stopped improving. Some customers left politely. Others didn't explain at all. Silence followed them. Leadership stopped talking about the future. Every meeting was about the present. How to finish contracts. How to avoid legal trouble. How to explain things without admitting too much. The energy that once filled the company was gone. Former coworkers told me the office felt empty even when people were there. No laughter. No urgency. Just routine. I walked past the building one evening and saw only a few lights on. I remembered staying late years earlier, fixing problems no one ever saw, believing I was protecting something real. The company didn't collapse because people stopped trying. They tried harder than ever. It collapsed because effort was used to hide problems instead of solving them. The final report arrived without drama. No meeting invite. No presentation. Just a shared document and silence. People read it on their own, then avoided eye contact afterward. The report didn't blame the market. It didn't blame timing. It focused on decisions. Clear ones. Equity changes made without transparency. Safeguards removed without replacements. Early warnings ignored. The timeline was simple and hard to argue with. One section explained how early contributors carried risk quietly. How their ownership created long-term thinking. How cutting that ownership changed behavior across the company. Not immediately, but predictably. Leadership stopped defending the past after that. Investors reviewed the report and asked fewer questions. Not because they understood everything, but because they understood enough. Future funding was no longer discussed. Inside the company, people spoke softly. No one joked. No one rushed. Everyone sensed the same thing. The story was finished, even if the company was still moving. I read the report carefully. There was no satisfaction in it. Only confirmation. The company didn't fail because people stopped working hard. It failed because the people who cared most were slowly pushed out. The equity cut had not been a single mistake. It had been a signal. And signals shape behavior faster than rules. Once ownership was treated as optional, responsibility followed it out the door. The report didn't end the company. It explained why the end could no longer be avoided. After the report, leadership met with investors one last time. The message was short. No recovery plan. No big pitch. Just options. Sell what could be sold. Close what couldn't. The company shifted into wind-down mode quietly. Projects were stopped. Contracts ended early. Teams were reduced again. No one argued anymore. People packed their desks slowly. Some were angry. Most were tired. Everyone understood this wasn't sudden. It had been coming for a long time. The company had tried to save money by cutting ownership quietly. What it actually did was remove responsibility from the people who held the system together. From that moment on, everything felt final. Not dramatic. Just settled. The company wasn't going to recover by working harder. It needed trust, and trust had already left. What followed wasn't a sudden collapse. It was a slow decision to stop pretending. And once pretending stops, the end comes quickly. The layoffs began without a public announcement. One team at a time. Desks emptied. Messages were sent quietly. People said goodbye in private chats. Customers noticed changes immediately. Support replies slowed. Features stopped improving. Some customers left politely. Others said nothing at all. Silence followed them. Leadership stopped holding large meetings. Only small groups now. Only urgent topics. The office felt smaller, even when full. I walked past the building one evening and saw fewer lights on. I remembered staying late, fixing problems no one knew existed, believing it mattered. It did. Just not in the way leadership understood. Former coworkers told me the company was trying to sell parts of the product. Not to grow, but to survive. Buyers asked hard questions. Stability. History. Risk. The answers were weak. The company had become careful in the wrong ways. It avoided truth instead of risk. It protected image instead of structure. I felt no joy watching this happen. Just understanding. The equity cut had seemed like a quiet business move. It didn't cause pain right away, but it changed behavior. And behavior shapes outcomes. The startup didn't fail in one moment. It failed in pieces. And every piece traced back to the same choice. Ownership had been treated like a number. When it was reduced quietly, commitment left quietly too. By the time leadership noticed, there was nothing left to save. I was contacted to explain my former role. What I handled. What changed? I answered calmly. I didn't accuse anyone. I explained how the system worked when ownership mattered, and how it changed when it didn't. The tone inside the company shifted again. Leadership spoke less. Meetings were shorter. Confidence drained from the room. Former coworkers told me the review pointed to one clear pattern. Early employees lost equity. Early employees left. Stability left with them. No one said it out loud, but everyone understood. The decision to cut equity had not saved money. It had pushed out the people who cared most. And once they were gone, the company lost more than labor. It lost memory. It lost judgment. It lost protection. The review didn't end the company. It explained it. And once the explanation was clear, there was nothing left to debate. After the review, the company changed in ways that were easy to feel but hard to describe. Decisions slowed even more. Emails were rewritten several times before being sent. Leadership avoided making promises they couldn't keep. Investors became distant. Meetings were shorter. Questions were sharper. Funding talks quietly stopped. The future that once felt close now felt far away. Inside the company, people stopped pretending everything was fine. Layoff rumors spread without anyone confirming them. Teams worked, but without energy. When people lose belief, effort turns into routine. Leadership held a meeting to discuss options. Cut more costs. Sell parts of the company. Pause projects. None of the choices sounded like growth. They sounded like survival. I was asked to join a call to explain the review findings in simple terms. I agreed. I spoke calmly. I explained how early ownership created care, how care created protection, and how removing equity removed that care. No one interrupted me. When the call ended, there was a long silence. The truth had landed, and it couldn't be ignored anymore. Leadership tried to explain it as coincidence. Inside the company, no one believed that anymore. Support teams were burned out. They apologized more than they solved. Engineers were careful to the point of fear. No one wanted to touch the wrong thing and make it worse. When systems fail often enough, people stop trying to fix them and start trying to survive them. Leadership added more tracking, new charts, new reports, more meetings. But tracking damage is not the same as stopping it. By the time a problem showed up in a report, it had already spread. I watched from a distance and felt strangely calm. This wasn't chaos. It was consequence. Every shortcut, every quiet decision, every ignored warning was finally lining up. The company had believed cutting equity was a clean fix. It reduced numbers on a page. What it didn't reduce was risk. It increased it. Ownership creates care. Care creates protection. Protection prevents failure. When ownership was cut, that chain broke. Now leadership was trying to rebuild stability without trust, without context, and without time. And stability doesn't grow in those conditions. The company wasn't collapsing dramatically. It was sinking slowly. And slow failure is the hardest kind to stop. The internal review was announced without much explanation. Outside advisors. Full access. Leadership called it routine. Everyone knew it wasn't. The reviewers asked simple questions. When were safeguards removed? Why were early warnings not documented? Who approved the equity changes? The answers were scattered. No clear story existed. Files were missing. Decisions had been made in meetings with no notes. Changes were framed as normal growth, but the timeline told a different story. Problems increased after key protections were removed. Customer losses followed soon after. I understood then that my exit hadn't caused the downfall. It had revealed it. The weaknesses were always there. They had just been hidden by ownership and care. Without those, the system was finally being honest. The turning point came when an investor joined a meeting unexpectedly. Their tone was calm, but their questions were sharp. Why were customers leaving? Why were fixes temporary? Why did costs rise after internal changes? Leadership answered confidently, but the answers felt thin. They spoke about market conditions and timing. The investor asked for data, proof, clear explanations. There wasn't much to show. Safeguards had been removed without records. Decisions were made quickly and verbally. Risk had never been tracked properly. The story leadership told didn't match the numbers. After the call, spending froze. Hiring stopped. Marketing paused. Survival mode began without being announced. Inside the company, fear settled in. People updated resumes quietly. Conversations moved to private messages. Trust inside the team faded just like it had with customers. I received a message asking if I would help explain things to the investor. Just to give context. I asked if they wanted honesty or reassurance. There was no reply. That silence said everything. The equity cut had seemed small at the time. A quiet adjustment. A business decision. Now investors were questioning leadership's judgment entirely. Once that happens, recovery becomes almost impossible. The company wasn't shut down yet, but it had crossed a line. Confidence was gone. And without confidence, no startup can survive for long. The weeks after the investor call felt slow and heavy. Nothing moved unless it had to. Every expense needed approval. Every decision was delayed. The speed the company once bragged about was gone. Customers kept leaving quietly. No angry posts. No loud complaints. Just contracts ending and accounts closing. I thought about that irony. They had cut equity to save money. Now they were avoiding fixes to save money. The same thinking repeated. The system was no longer stable. It was fragile and tired. And the people inside it were exhausted. I didn't feel satisfaction watching this unfold. I felt confirmation. Ownership isn't just a number on paper. It shapes how people act. When equity was cut quietly, ownership left quietly too. The company was learning that lesson now. And it was paying for it in real time. The pause turned into a pattern. Another customer followed. Then another. Not loudly. Not all at once. Just enough to make leadership uneasy. Revenue slowed in a way that couldn't be explained by timing alone. Inside the company, stress replaced confidence. Teams worked longer hours, but progress felt smaller. Every fix was rushed. Every mistake felt heavier. People stopped asking big questions and focused on getting through the day. Leadership reacted by adding pressure. More check-ins. More reports. More urgency. None of it addressed the real issue. The system wasn't broken in one place. It was weak everywhere. Former coworkers told me meetings had changed. No more jokes. No more excitement. Just worry. Decisions were reversed often. People were afraid to make the wrong call. I saw updates online claiming improvements were underway. Customers responded with doubt. Trust, once shaken, doesn't return easily. A consultant was brought in. Then another. Each one offered ideas without context. Fixes were layered on top of fixes. Complexity grew. Stability didn't. The money saved by cutting equity was gone now. Consultant fees, refunds, and lost customers cost far more. Still, no one said the original decision was wrong. That silence mattered. The company was spending energy trying to look stable instead of becoming stable. And the longer that went on, the harder recovery became. Former coworkers reached out casually. They asked if certain things were normal. If the system had always behaved this way. I answered carefully. I didn't want to alarm anyone. I also didn't want to step back in. Inside the company, pressure increased. Teams worked harder to keep things moving. Quick fixes became normal. No one slowed down to understand why problems kept repeating. Leadership blamed growth. Scaling pains. Bad timing. The usual excuses. What they didn't see was what I had taken with me. Not secrets. Not files. Just ownership thinking. The habit of asking what could break before it did. Without that mindset, the company was reacting instead of protecting. Every issue was treated as new, even when it wasn't. I watched from a distance, feeling strangely calm. I hadn't caused any of this. I had simply stopped compensating for decisions I no longer believed in. The equity cut had pushed me out quietly. My exit was just as quiet. But the space I left behind was larger than anyone expected. By the second month, the tone changed. Support tickets piled up faster than they could be closed. Engineers worked longer hours. Fixes were rushed without full testing. Each solution seemed to create another problem somewhere else. Leadership stopped talking about vision and started talking about effort. Work harder. Move faster. Stay focused. The message felt desperate. A key customer raised concerns during a call. Not angry. Just cautious. They asked if the company could still handle complexity. Leadership assured them it could. No proof was offered. Soon after, that customer paused their account. Not canceled. Just paused. Leadership said it was temporary. I recognized it as a warning. Revenue dipped slightly. Enough to be noticed. Finance started asking questions. Meetings were added. Answers became vague. A former coworker told me leadership was debating hiring help. Then decided against it. It would cost too much. It was stepping away from a system that no longer respected ownership in any form. I gave notice at the end of the week. Short. Professional. No emotion. Leadership thanked me and wished me well. No one mentioned equity. No one asked why now. My remaining days were calm. Too calm. I finished handover documents. I answered questions during work hours. I didn't stay late. I didn't jump in when things felt risky. I stayed within the lines that had been drawn for me. People assumed I was being kind, helpful, responsible. They didn't realize how much protection had already been removed. On my last day, a small issue nearly reached customers. I noticed it early. My hands paused over the keyboard. I knew how to stop it in minutes. I also knew it wasn't my role anymore. I closed the alert and continued packing my desk. The issue didn't explode, but it left damage behind. Small enough to ignore. Big enough to matter later. As I walked out, leadership shook my hand. They said they appreciated my years of work. I thanked them and left without argument. Outside, I felt lighter. Not relieved, just free of responsibility that was no longer matched by ownership. I didn't leave angry. I left aware. The company believed cutting equity was harmless. They believed commitment would stay the same. They were wrong. When I exited, I didn't take revenge. I took alignment with me. And without that, the system was about to behave exactly as it truly was. The first weeks after I left were quiet. Too quiet. From the outside, the company looked fine. Updates went out. Features shipped. Leadership sounded confident. If I hadn't known better, I might have believed everything was under control. Then small cracks appeared. A customer posted a question about missing data. Support replied late. Another customer followed up with the same issue. No one connected the dots. I began planning my exit seriously. I didn't rush. I wanted to leave cleanly. I documented my tasks. I made sure nothing would break immediately. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. But I also wasn't going to hold everything together anymore. The equity cut had shown me how the company really valued early work. Staying longer wouldn't fix that. It would only delay what was coming. I finished my work that day and shut down my computer. For the first time, leaving felt like the responsible choice. Once I decided to leave, everything looked different. I paid attention to details I used to ignore. Not because I wanted proof, but because clarity came easily now. I saw how rushed decisions piled up. How people fixed symptoms instead of causes. How leadership stayed confident while the ground shifted under them. I began documenting my work carefully. Only what I was asked to document. No extra notes. No warnings hidden between lines. Just the basics. Processes. Access. Known tasks. The invisible work stayed invisible. Leadership didn't notice. They were busy preparing for a funding update. Numbers mattered more than structure. Growth slides were polished. Risk was not mentioned. Another issue surfaced that week. A slow one. Customers noticed delays that were hard to explain. Support answered with templates. Engineers chased logs. I knew exactly where the issue came from. It traced back to a safeguard that had been removed months earlier. I watched the discussion unfold without stepping in. Suggestions were made. None of them addressed the real cause. A temporary fix was approved. The fix worked, briefly. That moment confirmed my decision. If I stayed, I would either be ignored or used as quiet insurance again. Neither option made sense anymore. Equity had once tied me to the future of the company. Without it, I could finally see the present clearly. And the present was unstable, rushed, and pretending to be strong. Leaving wasn't quitting. The system felt louder now, like it was always on edge. A new feature launch was rushed to impress investors. I reviewed my part and flagged 2 risks. The response was quick. We'll handle it later. The feature went live anyway. Within hours, customers reported strange behavior. Not a full outage, but enough to shake trust. Support scrambled. Engineers worked late. Leadership blamed timing. I knew exactly what caused it. It was the same risk I had flagged. I stayed silent. The next day, leadership praised the team for handling pressure well. I watched people nod, tired and stressed. No one felt proud. That was when I understood something clearly. The company was no longer learning. It was reacting. Each problem was treated as a surprise instead of a result. Equity had once made me think long-term. It made me careful. Now, decisions were made for speed and image. Protection had been replaced by hope. The startup still looked successful from the outside. Inside, it was running on momentum alone. And momentum always runs out when nothing is holding it in place. A meeting was called to review recent issues. Leadership asked for honest feedback. The room stayed quiet. People avoided eye contact. No one wanted to be the one to slow things down. I spoke once. I said the problems weren't random. They were connected. I explained that early safeguards had been removed and never replaced. The response was polite but distant. Someone said we needed solutions, not history. After the meeting, a manager pulled me aside. They asked if I was unhappy. I said I was confused. About my equity. About my role. About why prevention no longer mattered. They didn't have answers. Later that week, another early employee resigned. Quietly. No announcement. Just an empty desk the next morning. Leadership said it was personal. I felt the company thinning. Not just in people, but in understanding. Knowledge was leaving faster than it could be replaced. When equity was cut, something else was cut too. The instinct to protect. And without that instinct, the system was no longer guarded against slow failure. It was exposed, one small issue at a time. The second month after the equity change felt heavier. Problems didn't explode. They stacked. Delays here. Confusion there. Support spent more time explaining than solving. Leadership noticed the noise but misread it. They said teams needed to focus. They pushed harder. More features. Faster releases. Less discussion. I watched a risky change get approved in a single meeting. No testing plan. No fallback. I had warned against similar moves before. This time, I said nothing. The change went live and caused a brief outage. Short. Embarrassing. Customers noticed. Leadership apologized publicly and promised improvement. Internally, blame bounced around the room. No one talked about prevention. No one asked why these risks weren't being caught earlier. I saw a former teammate working late again, trying to hold things together. I recognized myself in them and felt a quiet sadness. They didn't know yet what had changed. That night, I reviewed my notes. The equity cut wasn't just a financial issue. It was a signal. A message that early work could be rewritten quietly. I realized then that my exit wasn't about money anymore. It was about alignment. I no longer believed in the future being promised. When ownership disappears, effort follows. And when effort fades, systems don't fail loudly. They decay. The startup was entering that phase now. The pressure inside the company increased as problems became harder to ignore. Leadership talked about staying positive, but their actions showed worry. Meetings were added without notice. Deadlines moved closer. Everyone was asked to do a little more. I kept my distance. I did my assigned work and nothing else. When issues appeared outside my scope, I logged them and waited. No one followed up. The issue returned 2 days later, worse than before. A meeting was called. People guessed at causes. Fixes were suggested without full understanding. I said nothing unless asked. A quick patch was approved. It worked on the surface. Leadership relaxed. I knew the fix created a deeper problem, but it wasn't my call anymore. That was the moment I understood how fragile things had become. The company still looked strong from the outside, but inside, it was relying on hope instead of knowledge. Cutting equity hadn't just pushed me away. It had removed ownership thinking from the system. And without that mindset, every decision became short-term. The startup was still moving forward, but it was doing so without anyone protecting the future. The first rail warning came from a customer, not a dashboard. They wrote a calm email asking why a feature behaved differently than before. Support replied with a template answer. The customer followed up confused. I read the message and recognized the cause immediately. It was a safeguard I used to manage quietly. Without it, the system still worked, just less reliably. I had flagged this risk weeks earlier. It had been noted and ignored. Leadership discussed the message in a meeting. They called it an edge case. Someone suggested watching it for now. No action was taken. I stayed quiet. A few days later, another customer reported the same issue. This time, support escalated it. Engineers looked into it and found nothing obvious. They closed the ticket. I felt a strange mix of relief and concern. Relief because I was no longer responsible. Concern because I could see the pattern forming. These were not random problems. They were connected. Leadership sent out an update saying the company was handling growth challenges well. The tone was confident. The words felt empty. I stopped checking systems outside work hours. I stopped thinking about fixes while eating dinner. The company no longer felt like something I owned. I just stopped doing the extra work that had never been written down. The work that existed only because I cared. When an issue appeared outside my assigned scope, I noted it and moved on. When a process felt risky, I followed the steps as written, even if I knew they were weak. I told myself this was fair. I was no longer an owner in the way I had believed. I was just an employee. At first, the company didn't notice. Leadership praised efficiency and focus. They said teams were finally learning to prioritize. I listened and stayed quiet. A small problem reached customers one afternoon. Nothing serious, just a delay. Support handled it slowly. I knew how to fix it in minutes, but no one asked me to. So I didn't step in. Later that week, the same issue appeared again. This time, it caused confusion. Leadership asked why it wasn't caught earlier. The answer was vague. No one mentioned me. I realized then how much of the company's stability had depended on work no one tracked. The systems hadn't changed. The effort behind them had. I didn't feel angry. I felt distant. When ownership was cut, commitment was cut with it. And the company was about to learn the difference between having protection and assuming it existed. By the next month, pressure began to build. Deadlines tightened. New features were rushed. Leadership wanted speed to impress investors. Shortcuts were taken openly now, not quietly. I followed instructions exactly. When something felt unsafe, I flagged it once and moved on. No follow-ups. No extra fixes. My responsibility ended where my role ended. Small issues turned into regular ones. Support tickets increased. Teams worked harder to keep up. Meetings focused on delivery, not risk. Leadership said this was normal growth. One afternoon, a system behaved strangely under load. I noticed it immediately. It was something I used to guard carefully. I documented it and waited. For the first time, I questioned why I was doing more than required. Why I stayed late. Why I protected things no one else noticed. Ownership had been my reason. And that ownership had been changed without my voice. That night, I wrote everything down. Dates. Words. Reactions. I wasn't planning to leave yet. But I knew trust had been damaged. And once trust breaks, work becomes just work. In the weeks that followed, I watched leadership closely. Not with anger, but attention. I noticed how equity was discussed only when new hires joined. How early employees were rarely mentioned. How loyalty was praised in words, not actions. I spoke privately with another early team member. I asked if their equity had changed. They hesitated, then said yes. Quietly. Without a clear explanation. We exchanged details and realized the pattern was larger than either of us. Leadership framed it as necessary. They said the company needed flexibility. They said early risk had already been rewarded through experience. That sentence stayed with me. Experience doesn't pay bills. Ownership was the promise. I didn't argue. I didn't threaten. I kept doing my job. But I stopped going beyond it. No more late nights. No more invisible fixes. No more carrying weight that wasn't acknowledged. At first, nothing changed. Systems still worked. Customers stayed happy. Leadership seemed confident. That almost made me doubt myself. But slowly, small things slipped. A process took longer. A risk wasn't caught early. A decision caused confusion. These were things I used to prevent without thinking. I didn't celebrate. I didn't feel proud. I just observed. The company was still moving forward, but without the quiet protection it once had. That was when I understood the real cost of cutting equity. It doesn't just reduce ownership. It changes behavior. And once behavior changes, outcomes follow. The change in my behavior was quiet, but it was real. I still showed up on time. I still completed my tasks. For the first time, I questioned why I was doing more than required. Why I stayed late. Why I protected things no one else noticed. Ownership had been my reason. And that ownership had been changed without my voice. That night, I wrote everything down. Dates. Words. Reactions. I wasn't planning to leave yet. But I knew trust had been damaged. And once trust breaks, work becomes just work. In the weeks that followed, I watched leadership closely. Not with anger, but attention. I noticed how equity was discussed only when new hires joined. How early employees were rarely mentioned. How loyalty was praised in words, not actions. I spoke privately with another early team member. I asked if their equity had changed. They hesitated, then said yes. Quietly. without a clear explanation. We exchanged details and realized the pattern was larger than either of us. Leadership framed it as necessary. They said the company needed flexibility. They said early risk had already been rewarded through experience. That sentence stayed with me. Experience doesn't pay bills. Ownership was the promise. I didn't argue. I didn't threaten. I kept doing my job, but I stopped going beyond it. No more late nights. No more invisible fixes. No more carrying weight that wasn't acknowledged. At first, nothing changed. Systems still worked. Customers stayed happy. Leadership seemed confident. That almost made me doubt myself. But slowly, small things slipped. A process took longer. A risk wasn't caught early. A decision caused confusion. These were things I used to prevent without thinking. I didn't celebrate. I didn't feel proud. I just observed. The company was still moving forward, but without the quiet protection it once had. That was when I understood the real cost of cutting equity. It doesn't just reduce ownership. It changes behavior. And once behavior changes, outcomes follow. The change in my behavior was quiet, but it was real. I still showed up on time. I still completed my tasks. I searched for messages explaining the change. I found none. No clear notice. No conversation. I asked a simple question in a private message, just asking for confirmation. The reply came hours later. It didn't answer the question. It said changes were normal as companies grow. Everyone had to adapt. That response made my stomach tighten. It was careful. Too careful. I asked again, this time for specifics. The reply was slower. Shorter. It said the changes were legal and aligned with company goals. That was the moment trust cracked. Not because of the equity itself, but because of how quietly it had changed. Ownership had been treated like a detail, not a promise. I closed my laptop and sat still for a long time. I realized something important then. If equity could be changed without a conversation, loyalty could be dismissed just as easily. I didn't confront anyone right away. I needed to be sure. I reread old messages, notes from meetings, even casual comments made months earlier. Equity had once been talked about clearly. Then slowly, it disappeared from conversation. No updates. No confirmations. Just silence. I finally asked for a meeting. Not to accuse, just to understand. Leadership smiled and spoke calmly. They said changes were part of growth. New investors. New structure. Everyone had been affected. When I asked why I wasn't told, they said it must have been mentioned before. They couldn't remember exactly when. That answer stayed with me. Ownership is not something you forget to mention. Especially to someone who built the company early. They showed me a chart. Clean and simple. My equity was smaller. Much smaller. They said it was still meaningful. They said I should focus on the future, not the past. I nodded, but something inside me shifted. After the meeting, I returned to my desk and worked like normal. I fixed issues. I helped teammates. But the feeling was different. The work felt lighter, not in effort, but in attachment. I listened closely and filled in the gaps quietly. When deadlines tightened, I absorbed the pressure. When something almost failed, I fixed it before anyone asked questions. New hires arrived with clear titles and higher pay. They were talented, but unfamiliar with the company's weak spots. I helped them without thinking twice. After all, we were building something together. That's what ownership meant to me. Equity came up less and less. Early on, it was discussed openly. Later, it was treated as settled history. I didn't mind. I assumed silence meant stability. No news was good news. One afternoon, I overheard a conversation about future payouts. The numbers sounded larger than expected. Larger than what my share should have allowed. I told myself I must have misunderstood. It was easy to doubt your own memory when everything else seemed to be working. Still, the thought stayed with me. I began paying closer attention to how ownership was discussed. Who spoke confidently? Who stayed quiet? I noticed that early employees rarely asked questions anymore. That silence felt familiar. It was the same silence I created when I fixed problems before they became visible. Useful, but dangerous if mistaken for strength. underscore 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 underscore. 3. The doubt grew slowly. I didn't want to believe anything was wrong. I trusted the people I worked with. I trusted the promises that had been made early on. But once a question enters your mind, it doesn't leave easily. I decided to review my documents. Nothing dramatic. Just to reassure myself. The paperwork was scattered across emails and shared folders. Old versions. New versions. Notes without explanations. I noticed language that hadn't been there before. Words like adjustment and reallocation. My equity percentage looked smaller than I remembered. At first, I assumed it was a formatting issue. Maybe the document showed a different stage. Maybe it was normal dilution. The offer came with a warning disguised as honesty. The pay would be low. The hours would be long. But the equity, they said, would make it worth it. Ownership was the reward for believing early. I accepted without hesitation. I wasn't looking for comfort. I was looking for something to build. From the beginning, the company felt unstable. Processes were loose. Decisions changed daily. Problems appeared without warning. I became the person who stayed calm when things went wrong. I fixed issues quietly, often before anyone else noticed. Not because I was told to, but because I cared. When you believe you own something, you protect it. Leadership talked often about loyalty, about how early employees were different. We weren't just workers. We were builders. Equity was described as proof of that trust, a promise that our effort mattered beyond a paycheck. I believed every word. As months passed, growth followed. New clients signed on. New hires filled desks. Meetings sounded more confident. Titles became more important. My work didn't change. I still handled the fragile parts. I still stopped small problems from becoming large ones. I never asked about my equity. It felt rude, almost disloyal. Ownership wasn't something you questioned. It was something you earned by staying late, fixing mistakes, and believing when things were uncertain. What I didn't understand yet was how easy it is to change something no one is watching, especially when trust makes you look away. As the company grew, so did my responsibilities. I became the person people came to when things felt risky. I handled problems that didn't fit cleanly into anyone else's role. If a system acted strange, I checked it. If a process felt weak, I reinforced it. Most of this work never made it into reports. It just made things smoother. Leadership started talking more about vision and scale. Meetings focused on future growth, not present risk.